He made me quit my job to be a full-time wife, then fired me from his life. And replaced me with someone who respected him more. If someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be starting over at 34, with no job, no husband, and a bruised soul, I would have laughed and called them a liar. Because 5 years ago, I thought I had it all. I met Derek at a mutual friend's wedding. He was tall, charming, articulate, and British. The accent alone could make a room stop breathing. I was working as a marketing executive at a top agency in Atlanta, doing well for myself, finally standing on my own after a long period of struggling through college and grad school. I wasn't looking for love, but somehow, Derek swept in like a perfectly written rom-com lead, too perfect to be real. From the start, he was intentional. Flowers on Mondays. Surprise lunch dates. Thoughtful texts. The kind of man that made your friends say, "Girl, don't let this one go." And trust me, I didn't plan to. By the 6th month, he brought up the idea of marriage. "I want to build with you," he said one night, his head in my lap as we watched a documentary. "I don't want a career woman, I want a wife. A partner. A queen who's focused on the home, the children, our life together." At first, I laughed it off. I told him I was a career woman. My job wasn't just a paycheck, it was a part of who I was. But Derek knew how to speak to my heart. "You've done enough, babe. You've built your name. Now let me take care of us. Let's create something sacred, not split between deadlines and dinner." It sounded noble. Loving, even. And the way he said it made me feel like I was choosing something greater. So, after months of consideration, and with the encouragement of my friends who saw how happy I looked, I turned in my resignation letter and walked away from a career I had bled for. I married Derek in a small but elegant ceremony 2 months later. I wasn't just giving up a job, I was surrendering my independence, trusting this man to catch me. And I believed, with all my heart, that he would. At first, married life was bliss. Or at least it looked like it. Mornings were slow. We'd wake up, drink coffee together, and talk about everything from politics to the weird dreams we had the night before. I threw myself into homemaking, cooking meals from scratch, decorating our home, learning all the little things that made Derek feel loved. He praised me endlessly in the beginning. "You're everything I ever wanted," he'd whisper while hugging me from behind in the kitchen. "You make this house a home." I felt seen. Needed. Important. But slowly, painfully slowly, things began to shift. And I can't even tell you the exact moment it started. He became distant. At first, it was small things. His texts got shorter. He stopped coming home for lunch. He'd work late and say he was too tired to talk when he got home. I figured it was stress. Work. Life. Something temporary. Then came the criticisms. "Didn't you used to dress better when you worked? Why's the house so quiet all day, don't you get bored? You're not contributing financially, the least you could do is keep things perfect." I brushed it off. Told myself marriage was about weathering seasons. But those seasons became storms. The man who once celebrated my career now mocked it. "I saved you from that rat race," he'd say with a sneer. "You should be thanking me." And yet, I found myself shrinking, apologizing for things I didn't even understand. I began to feel like a burden in the very life I had sacrificed everything for. I remember one night I cooked his favorite meal, wore his favorite silk dress, lit candles, and played our wedding song. I just wanted to bring us back. He walked in, looked around, and said, "What's this supposed to be? Some pity party?" Then he walked into the other room and shut the door. I stood there, mascara stinging my eyes, wondering what I'd done wrong. But the truth was, I wasn't what he wanted anymore. And deep down I think he never really wanted me at all. You know what's worse than being alone? Feeling alone while lying next to someone who swore to love you forever. That's what my nights became: cold, disconnected silence. We barely touched. We barely spoke. And when we did, it felt like I was speaking into a void. I tried initiating conversations. I asked him if we should go to therapy, if we could just talk about what was happening to us. He scoffed. Therapy? That's for broken people. We're fine. You're just overreacting. I wasn't overreacting. I was gasping for air. And somehow, I'd lost the right to say I was drowning. I stopped inviting friends over because I was ashamed of how tense things felt in the house. Derek didn't even pretend to be loving anymore. Around others, he'd throw in subtle jabs, comment on how lazy I'd gotten since leaving work, or how emotional I was becoming. People laughed. They thought it was playful. I died inside. I began doing side gigs, freelancing remotely just to feel like me again. But when he found out, he was livid. So what, you don't trust me to provide? No, Derek, I whispered. I just don't trust myself anymore. I had become a ghost of who I was. Then came the ultimate betrayal. I found a message on his laptop left open on our dining table like a slap to the face. It was from her. Her name was Savannah. She worked with him. The message was short. Just one line. Can't wait to see you again. I miss our nights. I felt my stomach drop. I sat there staring at the screen, shaking, hoping it was a misunderstanding. But in my heart, I already knew. Women know. He came home that night acting like everything was normal. Kissed my forehead. Asked what was for dinner. I served him his plate with hands that trembled. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. He didn't just stop loving me. He had replaced me. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding in my ears, replaying every moment of our marriage. Every sacrifice. Every time I put him first. Every time I silenced myself just to keep the peace. By morning, something in me snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I waited until he sat down with his usual smug confidence, scrolling through his phone like a man who had nothing to lose. And I simply said, I saw the message. He froze. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, I saw fear. What message? He asked, too quickly. I repeated myself. From Savannah. I know everything. He stared at me, silent. Then he smirked. You're overreacting again. It was just harmless flirting. You're reading into things. My hand shook. 7 years, Derek. I gave you 7 years of my life. I gave up my career. My independence. I made a home out of nothing. And you gave your heart to someone else while I was busy building a life for us. He stood up, annoyed now. Maybe if you hadn't turned into a nagging housewife, I wouldn't have looked elsewhere. That was it. That sentence broke something in me so deep, I physically felt it crack. I stood up too. But this time, I didn't cry. I walked over to the bedroom, pulled out the emergency folder I had hidden under my clothes, and held it in my hands like a shield. You think I've been stupid this whole time, Derek. But I've seen the signs. I've been preparing. He frowned. Preparing for what? I looked him straight in the eyes. For the moment I stopped being scared of losing you. And just like that I walked out. I didn't pack a suitcase. I didn't take anything. I just walked. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't even know what I was doing. All I knew was that I couldn't stay another second in that house, in that marriage, with that man who had drained every ounce of love and respect I had left. I went to my best friend's place. I didn't tell her much, just that I needed to stay for a while. She was understanding, but I could see the worry in her eyes. You need to get out of there, girl. He's been treating you like crap for so long, she said as we sat on her couch, surrounded by tissues and empty wine glasses. I nodded, but the weight on my chest didn't lift. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted to know how to fix it, how to make sense of what had happened to me. How to fix myself. The next few days were a blur. I stayed at my friend's place, processing everything. I began working remotely again, and it felt like I could breathe. My confidence, which had been shattered for so long, was slowly starting to come back. But then the text started. Derek. He was apologizing. He said he was sorry for everything, that he didn't mean it, that he needed me. The messages kept coming, one after another, and with each one, my anger swelled even more. I knew he didn't love me. I knew he'd never truly loved me the way I deserved. He loved the idea of me as someone who would make his life easy, who would cook, clean, and support him. But when I became someone with her own voice, her own identity, when I stopped being the perfect little wife and became me, he didn't know what to do. And when he found someone who didn't challenge him, who didn't ask questions, who didn't expect anything from him, he took it. He took her. I didn't answer his messages. I didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing he still had a hold on me. And then one day, after days of silence, I got a phone call from him. Can we talk? His voice was strained, filled with desperation. I stayed quiet for a moment, collecting myself. And then I said the words I never thought I'd say. No, Derek. You don't get to talk to me anymore. You've already said everything you needed to. I hung up the phone. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. But that freedom came at a cost. The days turned into weeks, and for the first time, I felt like I was living my own life again. I didn't feel lost anymore. I didn't feel invisible. I was me, standing tall and proud, rebuilding who I had once been. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had power over my own choices. But then came the moment I dreaded, the one I knew was coming but still wasn't prepared for. Derek showed up at my friend's place unannounced. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a knock on the door. My heart dropped into my stomach. When I opened the door, there he was. Standing in the doorway with a sheepish look on his face, his hands trembling slightly. He hadn't even bothered to change out of his work clothes. Derek. What are you doing here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to talk, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I stepped back, unsure of what to do, but my friend was right behind me. She wasn't about to let him in. No. Not today, Derek, I said firmly. You don't get to come back into my life just because you're suddenly having a crisis. You had your chance, and you blew it. He looked like he was about to break. The man I had loved, the man who had once been my whole world, was now reduced to a shadow of himself. He was trying to get me to feel sorry for him, to let him back in. But there was no sympathy left in me for him. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. Please, just hear me out, he begged, stepping closer. Why? So you can manipulate me again? I shot back, my voice strong and unwavering. I'm not your emotional punching bag, Derek. You've already taken enough from me. He stood there in silence, and for a moment, I saw the guilt in his eyes. But then, the familiar arrogance came back. You're being too dramatic. You're not being fair. I'm trying to fix things, but you're too stubborn to see that, he snapped. The words stung, but they didn't break me. If anything, they only strengthened my resolve. I shook my head slowly. No, Derek. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being realistic. You're not going to fix anything because you've already broken it beyond repair. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, before delivering the final blow. You cheated on me with my sister. You manipulated me into quitting my job. You used me. And now, you're trying to play the victim? No. I'm done. He opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. Leave, I said softly, but firmly. Just leave. And don't come back. With that, I closed the door. It felt final, like a chapter of my life had ended. But little did I know, that was only the beginning of the battle. The weeks after Derek left my life were a whirlwind of emotions. Some days I felt like I was floating, finally free from his control, and other days I sank into despair. But no matter how I felt, I knew I couldn't go back. I wouldn't go back. Derek, however, wasn't going to let go so easily. He started texting again, calling at all hours, showing up at my friend's house uninvited, sending me letters. But it was the letter from his lawyer that took me by surprise. I opened it, my hands shaking. The words on the paper felt like a slap across my face. You are required to attend mediation regarding the division of assets and custody of the children. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Not because I wasn't expecting it. I knew he'd try to get something out of me, to guilt me into giving him something, anything to prove I was still in his corner. But the reality of facing him in a legal setting, in front of a judge, was a whole new level of betrayal. I hired a lawyer immediately. I was ready. I had to be. In the first meeting with my lawyer, she told me something that made my heart race with both fear and determination. You're not just fighting for your share of the assets, she said. You're fighting for your future. For your dignity. And most importantly, for your peace of mind. I wasn't going to let him walk all over me anymore. Not physically, not emotionally, and certainly not financially. The mediation session was tense. Derek was arrogant, as usual. He walked in like he owned the room, like he was still the one calling the shots. But I had changed. The woman sitting across from him wasn't the same naive wife he had left behind. I was stronger, more resolute. When it came to the division of assets, I stood my ground. Derek tried to pull the same tricks he had before, acting like everything was still his, like he had the right to control everything. But I wasn't going to let him manipulate me any longer. In the end, I fought for what was rightfully mine, and I won. But it wasn't just about the assets or the money. It was about showing myself and him that I was no longer his possession. I was my own person. And no amount of money or legal documents could take that away from me. But the fight wasn't over. Derek didn't go down without a last attempt at trying to break me. The final court date was set. I had spent months preparing, gathering evidence, and fighting back against the man who had torn my life apart. I was exhausted, but I was ready for this final showdown. No matter what, I was going to walk out of that courtroom a victor, whether it was just for my dignity, or something more. The day of the trial, I wore a suit. Not for him, but for me. It was my armor, my statement that I was no longer the woman who would quietly take whatever life and Derek threw at her. When we entered the courtroom, Derek was already there, sitting across from me with his lawyer by his side. His posture was arrogant, as always, but there was a nervousness in his eyes. A vulnerability I hadn't seen before. I sat down, my hands slightly trembling but steadying with each passing minute. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. The first part of the proceedings was routine talking about finances, assets, the house. But then it came to the most painful part, the children. I could see it in Derek's eyes. He was playing his cards, trying to get as much as he could, trying to manipulate the situation in his favor. He was talking about shared custody, and I could feel the anger rising in my chest. He didn't deserve to have any say over the children. He hadn't earned it. He didn't even want to be a father. He wanted to play the role when it was convenient for him, but when it came to taking responsibility, he was nowhere to be found. I raised my hand to speak. My lawyer, who had been supportive throughout the entire process, gave me an encouraging look. Your Honor, I don't care about the money, or the assets, I said, my voice unwavering. But I do care about my children. And I will do whatever it takes to protect them from him. He doesn't deserve to be in their lives. Derek stood up, trying to argue, but the judge silenced him with a firm voice. We'll have a short recess while I review the custody arrangement, the judge said, before walking out of the room. For the next few minutes, I sat there, fighting to keep the tears at bay. It wasn't the courtroom drama that had me emotional, it was the thought that he could still have a piece of my life after everything he had done. He didn't deserve that. When the judge returned, there was a heavy silence in the air. The decision was finally made. And it wasn't what I expected. I had won full custody of our children. Derek was granted visitation rights, but it was clear the judge saw right through him. He had no power here. Not anymore. As I left the courtroom, a strange feeling washed over me, relief, but also something deeper. I felt empowered, but I also felt the weight of what I had been through. I had finally broken free. The days that followed the court decision felt surreal. I had gotten everything I fought for. My children, my peace of mind, and a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. But there was still a lingering emptiness, a void I couldn't quite fill. I kept telling myself that it was over. That Derek had no more power over me. That the battle was won. But the reality of starting over, of truly being alone, was hard to face. For a while, I was in a haze. I was a single mother now, responsible for my children, my future, and my healing. But every time I looked at my kids, I was reminded that I had done the right thing. I had fought for them. And I would continue to fight for them, no matter what. Derek's attempts to stay in my life were relentless. He started reaching out more frequently. Texting me, trying to make amends, trying to pull me back into his world of manipulation. But I had learned from the past. I wasn't going to be fooled again. One day, he showed up at my doorstep. He had no shame left. Please, he begged. I made a mistake. Let's fix this. We're still family. I didn't even flinch. I didn't feel the anger I once would have felt. I felt nothing but pity. No, Derek, I said calmly. You don't get to come back into our lives. You don't get to fix anything. You had your chance. And you blew it. His face twisted with frustration, but I stood firm. I knew what I had to do, and I wasn't going to let him drag me back down. I closed the door in his face. That was the moment I realized I was truly free. But it wasn't easy. The next few months were a blur of figuring out life without him. I had to adjust to being a single mother, handling everything from school runs to bedtime stories, to making sure my children knew they were loved and safe. But there were also moments of clarity, moments where I saw just how far I had come. I found my strength in the small victories. Watching my kids thrive, seeing them smile without the fear of their father's manipulations, felt like a victory in itself. It wasn't always perfect. There were still hard days when I missed the life I thought I was supposed to have, days when the weight of the past threatened to consume me. But I had learned something important through all of this. I was capable. I was strong. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, and I was proud of it. I wasn't the woman I used to be. I was stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. As time passed, my life slowly found its rhythm. I focused on healing, on being the best mother I could be, and, most importantly, on learning how to love myself again. The scars from my marriage were deep, but I was no longer defined by them. I was moving forward, piece by piece, rebuilding what I thought was lost forever. I started making new memories, ones that were not weighed down by the past. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with while I was in that toxic relationship. I began dating again, tentatively at first, but I took my time. I knew that my happiness wasn't dependent on someone else. I had to be whole on my own first. But one evening, as I was tucking my children into bed, I got a call that shook me to the core. It was from Derek. I hesitated, wondering why he was calling now. My life was peaceful, and I had nothing left to say to him. But my curiosity got the best of me, and I answered. Hello? I said, my voice steady but cautious. There was silence on the other end for a long moment before he spoke, his voice hollow. I need to tell you something. It's about me. About everything. I held my breath, my heart racing. What could he possibly have to say now? Derek, I don't need anything from you, I replied, keeping my tone calm. You made your choices. We're done. But he insisted, his voice growing more desperate. No, listen. I've been trying to fix things with myself. And I need you to know something. Something that might help you understand why I did what I did. My mind was racing. What could possibly be so important that I need to hear it? There was another long pause before he finally spoke, the words hanging heavily in the air. I never loved you the way you deserved, he said, his voice breaking. I thought I did, but I was wrong. I didn't realize it until everything fell apart. And now, I don't know how to fix it. I stood in stunned silence. All these years, I had waited for him to show remorse, for him to admit the betrayal, but this was unexpected. It wasn't the apology I had wanted or needed. It wasn't the closure I was looking for. It was just a man who was lost in his own guilt and regret, trying to find a way back to something that had never been real. I don't need your apologies, Derek, I finally said, my voice firm but not angry. I've already forgiven you. I've already moved on. And I'm not going to look back. There was a long silence on the other end. I knew he was struggling with his own emotions. But in that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need closure from him anymore. I had closed that chapter myself, and I was ready for the next part of my story. I hung up the phone, feeling an unexpected weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't the end I thought I needed, but it was the one I deserved. And as I looked at my children, I knew that I had done the right thing. I had chosen myself. I had chosen their future. And, most importantly, I had chosen to be free.